Well, welcome everybody. I'm particularly impressed at all who managed to get through the very dense level of Senate House security, which normally deters the most ardent reader, though not the most ardent student. Thank you all for coming. This is the 9th J.P. Barron Memorial Lecture. John Barron was one of the directors of the Institute of Classical Studies in the past, but that was the least distinguished of the various roles he led. At some point he organised what was a sort of precursor of SAS, bringing together institutes. He served on the University Grants Committee, which is so many generations of acronyms ago. You can hardly remember what it was like. One of the things that distinguished that committee from what we have now is that it was all about cooperation, it was all about making connections, and not about promoting competition. And that, I think, was very much John's style, as I remember him, working within King's, working across what's now the Federation of London, working here in the Senate House, and then in the later stage of his career working in Oxford as the Master of St Peter's. John was enormously good fun, and he also had fantastically broad interests. His definition of Hellenic studies covered everything. So in the course of the 9 lectures we've given, we've had archaeologists, we've had Byzantinists, we've had historians and people talking about Greek literature, and there's no bit of that field within which John wouldn't have felt at home. It's a great pleasure to have, I think, probably the first philosophical Barron lecturer, and to welcome Angie Hobbs. Angie and I have known each other for a very long time. Once upon a time we were both research fellows at the same kindly but rather traditional Cambridge College. And I've got quite a vivid memory of one of the great projects at the college in the time we were research fellows there was building a new loo block for the fellows. And this has devoured vast amounts of governing body time, as you can imagine, looking at different plans and designs. And eventually, it's a rather delicate, stately, sort of octagonal building put in such a way that you can sort of pop into the loo on your way into dessert or dinner in the summer or whatever. And one of the last bits of the design that had to be fixed was what to put on the 2 doors in the loo block. And it was pretty clear that one you could call gentlemen or fellows or something, but what would be on the other label that was much more contentious, should you say lady fellows or women fellows? That sounded quite modern. Or women, but then women and fellows. And this debate went round for a while. I remember Angie stopped it at the end by saying, it's all right, you don't need to put anything on the door. There's only 2 of us and neither of us are going to forget which one it is now. Andrew went on has a very distinguished career writing on Plato and working in Warwick for a long time. And she carries on doing that, and that's what she's going to talk about here. But she's also done a huge amount as a professor of public understanding of the humanities and the philosophy in particular, and has been an advocate for taking philosophy out of the academy into a broader world. I think that's something John would have approved of, actually. She's also been a long-standing friend to the School of Advanced Study. 2 directors actually sent their apologies. Barry Smith, who's probably in the vineyard somewhere, and Philip Murphy, who's an old friend as well. And Andrew played a key role in setting up public engagement activities in the school, and sitting on the panel selecting Sarah Churchwell, who's our new professor. It's really great to have you here, talking to the ICS, talking to philosophers, and giving your Barron Memorial Lecture. Angie, welcome.
Oh, Greg, thank you. Thank you. I've never been introduced via a news story before. I like it. I've forgotten that. I remember a really, really long discussion at the first governing body meeting about whether the mulberries or Milton's mulberry tree should only be used for mulberry jam, or whether we should return to the ancient college tradition of mulberry sorbet at the Christmas feast, and that took about an hour. I remember that one. Very good mulberries they were too. Nobody knows whether Milton planted the mulberry tree or just lounged, composing beneath it. So Socrates, Eros, and magic. This is based on a passage in Plato's Symposium, but it's going to branch out a bit. We're going to dabble in the Renaissance at one point. Now, so here we go. So you all know Plato. There he is. There's Plato in Raphael's School of Athens. You all know this better than me. I think it was painted 1509 to 10, but I'm sure there's somebody here who'll know that more accurately. Plato looking fetching in cerise, pointing up to the sort of the heavens, because of course the otherworldly forms are where reality is at. And his student, and very, very disobedient student, as students should be, Aristotle, is looking winsome in azure, pointing down to the ground, because that's where he thinks reality is. I don't know if they really wafted around Athens in colour, but it makes for a good picture. Right, here's the puzzle. I'm going to talk for sort of, it'll be about 50 minutes. If you want to time when you get your and then a couple of questions, and then if you're timing when do I get a glass of chilled white wine on this hot day, it won't be too long. Here's the puzzle. So Plato's Symposium 202D, Diotima. So Diotima is almost certainly fictitious, sort of priestess, sort of seer in Plato's Symposium, and Socrates gives his speech about what the nature of erotic love via a conversation he allegedly had as a young man with this almost certainly fictitious, I'll call her a priestess, we're not told for sure. Anyway, she tells the young Socrates in this earlier conversation, so the symposium is set, the dinner party is 2:16, Plato, the frame conversation's probably about, sorry, did I say, sorry, apologies for that. The dinner party, of course, is 4:16, the frame conversation is about 4:04, and Plato's writing it possibly after 3:85. And so at this fictitious dinner party in 4:16, Socrates recounts to the other symposiasts a conversation he claims he had with this priestessy-like woman called Diotima when he was a young man. And she says that Eros, the god of, well, we say god, but she's about to discredit that. They've been talking about Eros as a god to date, but that Eros is not a god, but a great daimon. And that everything daimonic lies between the divine and mortal realms, its power being that of interpreting, we'll come back to that at the end if we have time, and conveying things from humans to gods and from gods to humans, entreaties and sacrifices from the former, and commands and returns for sacrifices from the latter. Being in the middle, it fills in the space between them so that the whole is bound together into one continuum. And she goes on. It is through this daimonic realm, that the whole techne of the seer, the mantis, operates, and that of priests, and of those concerned with sacrifices, rites, and incantations, epoidai, and everything to do with the seer, with magic, goetea. God does not mix with humanity, but it is through the daimonic that all association and converse, dialectos, exists between gods and humans, whether awake or asleep. And in 203D, a little bit later, she says that Eros philosophizes throughout his life, a clever magician, Delos Goias, a wizard, or a literally, pharmacist, a pharmakeus, and a sophist. Okay, so we've got Eros, the daimon, philosophizing throughout his life, but also a clever magician and a wizard. Now this intertwining of the daimonic, Eros, philosophy, sophistry, and magic is startling for a number of reasons, because Plato's characters usually, not always, as we'll see, but usually deploy terms for magic and magicians as terms of disparagement. For instance, Goias, epoidai, pharmakeus, manganeia, katadesis, epigogai. And I've given you some examples. We're going to be coming back to some of these, such as Gorgias. For instance, I'll just pick out a couple. Gorgias 483, that's when this young hothead Callicles, this aspiring politician, is gives this sort of proto-Nietzschean view that the conventions of the state stifle young lion cubs, presumably like himself, and bind the talented young lion cubs in the state with the spells and magic and incantations and to pin them down. Meno will be, this is an important passage, we'll be coming back to that. Meno's getting fed up with Socrates continually bashing down his attempts to define virtue, and he claims that Socrates is enchanting and bewitching and drugging me. And he said, you better watch out, Socrates, because if you ever happen to leave Athens, you'll probably be tried for being a wizard. So obviously very heavy irony on Plato's part there, though not, I think, on Meno, who's sort of Tim, nice but dim. Then the sophist and Euthydemus, again very pejorative views of magic. Famous passage in the Republic we're going to come back to, which is basically attacking all the sort of the false prophets and charlatans and those who go around saying they can sell you interventions with the gods for a hefty fee. 598 and 602 in the Republic are likening art, the creations of art, to deceptions. And then in Laws 909 and 932, again we've got pretty fearsome attacks on magicians. So that's the usual story. And it's particularly telling that some of these attacks link the harmful magicians and the outright charlatans with seers, with the mantes, particularly in the Republic and the Laws passages we've looked at. Now, although Diotima herself is not explicitly called a mantis, both her practices, such as delaying the plague, arriving in Athens for 10 years, and her place of origin, Mantinea, strongly suggests that Plato intends that she should at least partly be viewed as a mantis. And it's also significant, given that Diotima calls Eros a sophist, as well as a philosopher and a magician, that these harmful and deceitful and fraudulent magicians and seers are in several places associated with sophists as well, particularly in the sophist, obviously, but also in that Laws passage. Now, Plato's usual strategy in the sophist, in the Laws, in the Republic, is to try to distinguish the philosopher from this ragtag bunch of magicians and sophists and false prophets and snake oil salesmen. So on the rise at the moment, I've been tweeting a lot of these passages recently. Now the question of Diotima's portrayal of Eros as a magician, as a goyes, is particularly pressing, given that, as some of you will know, Socrates is himself depicted by Plato in the dialogue as at least a partial embodiment of Eros. So Diotima's description of the daimon Eros and Plato's description of Socrates throughout the dialogue have a lot of similarities, has been noticed at least since Marsilio Ficino wrote about this in Florence in 1484 in his De Amore. They both are barefoot, they both are poor but resourceful, they both hang out in doorways and on thresholds, they're both philosophers and so on. So if Eros is a magician in Diotima's eyes, then Socrates will be too. So the stakes are quite high in calling the daimon Eros a magician, because it's going to imply that the archetypal philosopher par excellence for Plato, Socrates, is also going to be a magician, and indeed a sophist, but we're not going to be concentrating so much on sophistry this evening because of the time constraints. Okay, so what is a magician? Part one. Right, let's have a rough working initial definition of magician, and indeed a goyes. And we'll come back, we're going to refine this a bit later in what is a magician part two, near in the end. And I've come up with a being who or which effects some kind of transformation which the audience cannot rationally comprehend at all. Now that at all is really important, because there's lots of things that I, for instance, particularly me, don't rationally comprehend, like how a mobile phone works so quickly. But I don't think it's magic, so I'm perfectly well aware that there are physical laws that account for it, and there are plenty of physicists and engineers and technicians and perfectly ordinary members of the public, such as my daughter, who do understand these physical laws. So I don't think it's magic. So it's got to be that you don't comprehend it at all. You're really baffled about what is going on. Now, the magician, the guys, of course, may well rationally comprehend what she or he is doing, at least up to a point, and indeed may have to rationally comprehend what he or she is doing, or they won't be able to affect the transformation. So the key question we're going to start with, I said we're going to refine all this later, is whether this transformation affected by the magician is only ever an illusion. Okay, so that's sort of setting up the puzzle. It is a weird passage. It is not Plato's normal run of things. I once spent 3 to 4 weeks of my life with a Platonic lexicon, going through every single instance in the Platonic corpus where he uses any of those words or the verbal cognates or anything to do with them at the beginning. And it's very, very unusual, this passage. So can we explain it away? I mean, I won't waste time too much on the scholarship here. I have just recently published a scholarly paper that this goes along with, so you can find out about the scholarship, but most of the commentators either just ignore this passage because they're embarrassed about it, and it just doesn't fit in with current fashions in analytic philosophy, or they try to very quickly and embarrassedly explain it away. So here are some attempts that one might come up with to explain it away. Oh, is this our occupation? How exciting.
Magician.
Exciting, yeah, look, there we go. We've got some, brilliant. That's what students should be doing. I don't know what they're protesting about. What have you got, you know, as the phrase goes. Is it James Dean? That's James Dean phrase, isn't it? What are you rebelling against? What have you got? We'll just wait till, because we are being recorded, we'll just wait till they've gone by. University of London, enough! Greg! Enough!
Enough.
Yeah. We've had lots of, you're going to edit this out, aren't you, Valerie? Or somebody will.
Certainly ask for it to be edited.
Yes. We've had lots of us at Sheffield. We had the arts occupied, but that was in support of our pensions, so we were sort of, that was...
I think this started in support of them, now just occupying in support of.
Yeah. 1968. A bit more comfortable. Right.
Okay, well, until they get another...
Yeah, we can crack on. We can crack on now. So, perhaps Eros is both a philosopher and a magician, but at different times, wearing different hats. We'll come back to all these in a bit. Perhaps Diotima's intertwining of these terms is yet more evidence of her slippery and unreliable nature. For instance, at 208c, Socrates said she replied to one of his questions like a perfect sophist. Not usually a good thing to be in Plato's book, not normally a fan of the sophists. It's when she's completely and unscrupulously rewrites one of the earlier speeches by a young student of rhetoric called Phaedrus. And there was also huge public confusion about the status of seers. For instance, there's the unhappy case of Theoris of Lemnos. She and her entire family were tried and put to death because she was accused and tried and convicted of being a witch. And Demosthenes, the orator Demosthenes, calls her a witch, a pharmacist. But Philochorus, apud Hippocration, calls her a mantis, a seer, so sort of, you know, are you a witch, are you a seer? But Plutarch confuses it even more by calling her a priestess, hiereia. So the very fluid boundaries between magic, prophecy, religion, and so on. Now, as a I mean, and another example, for instance, is Apuleius, isn't it? So when he's put on trial for being a magus, and he sort of says, no, it's very, very common to confuse magicians with philosophers and things. There's a lot of confusion. And we're coming back to Apuleius a bit later. So as a philosopher, a sophist, a magician and a guide, because she's Socrates' guide up the ladder of love, Diotima in fact fits much of her own description of the intermediary daimon Eros. It's often pointed out in the secondary literature that Socrates, the character of Socrates in the dialogue, is depicted as partly a representative of Eros, an embodiment of Eros, but actually Diotima is too. Okay, another possibility, maybe she's just speaking metaphorically. This is very, very popular in the little bits of the secondary literature that deal with this, such as Belfiore. So, and people can bring in Meno 80 A to B to support this interpretation. That's the bit you remember where Meno gets cross with Socrates for not allowing any of his attempts to define virtue, and says, oh, you are bewitching and enchanting and drugging me, and if you left Athens you'd be put on trial for being a wizard, so watch out. But is he just, but it's not clear to me that Meno is just speaking metaphorically there. For instance, he comes from Thrace, as we know from another Platonic dialogue, Gorgias 5:13, as we know from Aristophanes' Clouds, if you wanted to hire a witch in ancient Greece, Thrace was where you went. It was the home of witches. I stayed in a place like that in Cornwall recently, which is apparently the national centre for witches and wizards, and I believe it. I met lots of them. So, I mean, you know, Meno maybe little doubts in his mind. Is he just, you know, he's partly speaking metaphorically, but entirely. And we've got the same ambiguity in the Symposium itself. The character Agathon earlier on in the dialogue at 194 jokingly, I say jokingly, accuses Socrates of bewitching him. The general come statesman come sort of general wide boy and rock star Alcibiades later says that Socrates' words had the effect of enchanting and bewitching him and all the other hearers. Now, yes, there's metaphor there, but is it just metaphor? I think these characters are genuinely confused by Socrates. Socrates is so weird. He's portrayed as weird. He's portrayed as placeless in the Symposium. He's portrayed as very, very odd. Okay, but even if they're not just speaking metaphorically, even if these other characters do have some doubts in their minds about whether Socrates is part magician, that doesn't prove that Plato wants us to view Socrates as a magician. It doesn't even prove that Socrates thinks of himself as a magician, because Plato might simply be wanting to highlight how people misunderstood Socrates. Very famous passage in the Phaedo, Plato's Phaedo, where this is the last day of his life, you remember, and he's waiting for the hemlock, and the various characters standing around sort of bewailing the fact he's about to leave them. And you know, one of the characters says, you know, where you're trying to say we shouldn't fear you dying, you're trying to give us all these logical arguments why we shouldn't fear death, but actually there's a little child in all of us which fears death as if it were a hobgoblin. Do you have any enchantments, Socrates, that can soothe us, can bewitch away our hobgoblin, childlike sort of fear of death? And Socrates, you know, and Socrates sort of says, well, you know, you have to find this enchanter after I'm gone. There are going to be other enchanters in Greece. So Socrates, even his closest friends talk of Socrates as some kind of enchanter and say, where will we find somebody with your powers after you've gone? And Socrates kind of goes along with it. He occasionally uses this magical language of himself. He does this in Xenophon as well, not just in Plato. And I've given you a memorabilia passage as well, where Socrates goes along with a courtesan, speaks of Socrates as some kind of enchanter, and Socrates goes along with that language about himself. And certainly Aristophanes, much less benignly, I think quite malignly in the Clouds, has his very lampooned character of Socrates in the Clouds, going along with the various attempts to use magic to avoid the repayment of debts. That sounds strange. They want to hire a witch to draw down the moon so monthly debt repayments can't be requested because the moon has disappeared. Because it's good employers, isn't it? So there was a lot of confusion, and Plato might just be playing around with that idea. The people just didn't know how to see Socrates, but that doesn't in itself mean that he thinks that we should see Socrates the magician, so we're not there yet. So when Diotima calls Eros a magician, as well as a philosopher, and given we've seen the links between the character of Socrates and the daimon Eros in the Symposium, she may also have misunderstood Eros and hence Socrates. So she might have misunderstood the nature of the daimon Eros when she calls Eros a magician. She may have got confused. So, problems with these explanations. Now the first one, which is the different hats idea. Sometimes you're a philosopher, sometimes you're a magician. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we, in our working lives, you know. So, but actually, it doesn't make sense because the more the dialogue portrays Socrates as a partial embodiment of Eros, and he's certainly wholly an embodiment of the philosopher, it makes it very difficult to have this different hats idea of Socrates, given Socrates goes on and on and on about how your work and your words and your life should all be integrated. You shouldn't have different hats, you should have everything integrated. That's part of his ethics of flourishing. So I think we can discount A. B, this is just evidence that Diotima is a slippery sophist, unreliable, we shouldn't trust her, all this talk of magic. Well, yes, she is a bit slippery, and we are meant to interrogate her, I'm sure, but she's not just a slippery sophist, she's also given one of the most philosophically profound speeches in all of Plato, indeed in all of Western philosophy. She's going to take us up the ladder of love shortly afterwards, a speech which was influenced not just philosophers, but theologians, and such as John of Climacus, and many current Greek Orthodox theologians and psychologists such as Freud and so on. So we should take her description of Eros seriously. She's not a joke character, she's a very, very authoritative figure. That doesn't mean we have to take what she says at face value, but we should take it seriously. Now, in considering C in D, so let's just remind you, C, is it just a metaphor? D, even if it is a metaphor, that doesn't tell us how Plato wants us to see Socrates, because he may be highlighting the confusion that people have. At this point, we need to bear in mind that not all of Plato's uses of magical terminology are hostile, though the only unequivocally unhostile ones I've found are there's quite a few uses of epoidai, incantations, which are not hostile. Sometimes uses these in medical contexts, such as with midwives and the Theaetetus, doctors in the Republic. He also can speak of words, particularly philosophic words, which cure our soul, as incantations in the Charmides. The myth at the end of the Phaedo is called an incantation. And in his very, very ambivalent use of pharmacon words throughout his corpus, particularly in the Phaedrus, as Derrida has noted, they're certainly not all hostile. But pharmaca and pharmacon are more difficult to pin down because they're not always sorceries. Sometimes they are just medical drugs, and sometimes they're the kinds of drugs used by wizards and witches. So you have to do quite a lot of digging if you see the word pharmacon or pharmaca to work out whether a magical context is involved. But they're not all hostile, but though the clearest one is apoidoi. I haven't found another use of goyes or goyete magic, magician and magic, which is not hostile. Also, we now need to bring in a whole other tradition of reading Plato and understanding Plato, which goes through the Neoplatonists on into the Renaissance, which has a very different line from the analytic line of dismissal or embarrassment of any talk of magic in Plato that we've looked at so far. Because the view that there were good as well as harmful kinds of magic was very powerful in both late antiquity and the Renaissance. And the Neoplatonists and the Renaissance scholars, particularly Ficino, who emphasize that there can be a good as well as a harmful kind of magic, they think that they're going back to Plato. Actually, Ficino's case, he thinks he's going back even earlier than Plato to what he calls the one ancient theology, but never mind that now. To briefly summarise, in Ficino, what he calls natural magic, which he opposes to demonic magic, natural magic is somehow, it's about understanding, and there's a consequence of the understanding linking up and utilising the inherent properties of things, both animate and inanimate. And he opposes natural magic to what he calls demonic magic. It gets very complicated because he talks of ancient Greek daimons, as we're talking about now, and he talks of demons in Christian demonology, and he spells them the same way. But he does oppose natural magic to bad Christian demonic magic, which is using the devil and the devil's sort of incubi as accessories to, you're calling up the devil or the devil's incubi to help you. And for Ficino, and he writes about this throughout his work, particularly in the 3 books on life, but in many of his works, I've just written actually a companion paper to this on Ficino and magic and Plato. Natural magic is amenable to rational explanation and exploration and utilisation and crucially empirical testing. I mean, Ficino, he was a priest. In his own eyes, he was a doctor. He was medically trained. Whether he was a fully fledged doctor isn't clear. He was also an alchemist and a magician, though on the quiet, because he could have been put to death for it. And he was a philosopher, and he was all these things. And he felt it was quite comfortable to be all these things because he didn't feel, because he saw natural magic as something that you could rationally explore and test. And Ficino takes seriously Diotima. So in his, he wrote a work which he initially called a commentary on Plato's dialogue, or on Plato's Symposium. He later calls it the De Amore, and it's a mixture, it's a hugely syncretic mix of lots of views on love from lots of different philosophers and writers, and a lot of Ficino's own sort of alchemical spices. But there are some really, really interesting discussions of passages of the Symposium, and it's interesting to see which passages he picks on to discuss. And he's very interested in 202 to 3, which we're looking at. And he takes seriously Diotima's description of Eros as a magician, Margus in his translation, because he says, you know, the whole work of, he says Eros is a magician because, you know, the whole work of love is through magic, because magic is about accessing the natural sympathies and harmonies that bind the universe together. And it's a view that he gets from a lot of the Neoplatonists, a little bit from Plotinus, particularly from Proclus and Iamblichus. So there is this absolutely powerful alternative way of reading Plato's Symposium, which was really strong. And in this other paper I've just written, I argue that even Newton was very influenced by this tradition of reading Plato and the Neoplatonists via Ficino, and it was really strong up to the end of the 17th century. So in which that it was people really interested in how philosophy and magic might go together and why that might make sense Okay. So, let's take our cue from Ficino and the Neoplatonists, and indeed, I think, Plato. Let's take this puzzle seriously. If Eros is both a philosopher and a magician, then what might the magical dimension tell us about both erotic love and philosophy? And as Socrates is portrayed as at least a partial embodiment of Eros, I won't waste time here saying why I think it's only partial, then what might the claim tell us about Socrates as well? And if it is the daimonic realm, this that fills in the space between, if you remember that opening quote, it's this intermediary daimonic realm that fills in the space between the mortal and the immortal realms, so that the whole is bound together into one continuum. What might, and if everything to do with magic inhabits this intermediary daimonic realm, as 202-3 says very clearly, then what might the connecting powers of magic actually be? Let's take that as a serious claim and a serious challenge to think about. Also, and I think this is really important, examining the magical nature of the daimon Eros will also deepen our understanding of the daimonic in general, and this is vital in the Symposium, in that just after this passage, we've been dealing with 202-3, just afterwards in 204-5, Diotima is going to say that eudaimonia, flourishing, but of course literally being guarded by a beneficent daimon, you can see the root there, is the final goal of all human desire and all human activity. In fact, she's going to rewrite all human love and desire in terms of actually being directed towards the goal of eudaimonia, whether we know it or not, or whether the birds know it or not. So eudaimonia is about to become an absolutely key term in the Symposium, but we've just been talking about this daimonic realm. So this is going to be crucial, I think. I think, though the word eudaimonia, when Plato's writing this in the 380s BC, though it's largely, the daimonic root of it has become sort of redundant in everyday speech, but I think Plato wants to get us to uncover that. I mean, what does it mean to be guarded over by a beneficent daimon, particularly if that beneficent daimon is Eros? What does that mean? And this will further deepen our understanding, of course, of Socrates, because of all the links between Socrates and the daimonic. Of course, he talks about his daimonian sign, his daimonic sign in the Apology and the Phaedrus and elsewhere, and he, obviously one of the charges brought against him at his trial is that he refuses to believe in the city's gods and brings in new daimonic beings into Athens. So Socrates was heavily linked to the daimonic in the public mind. So let's really understand what this daimonic realm might be. It's important. So back to what is a magician, part 2. Okay, I think I can wrap up by 6. Is that all right? Of course. We started a few minutes late. I know it's a hot evening. People are going to want a chilled white wine, including me. What is a magician, part 2? So if a magician, you remember, is a being who or which effects some kind of transformation which the audience cannot in any way rationally comprehend, then we can now refine this as follows. I should just add at this point, it's a transformation which the audience cannot in any way rationally comprehend if they know a transformation is taking place. Or some kind of magic is taking place, or they would not be able to comprehend in any way if they were aware that an act of magic was taking place, because of course some acts of magic don't declare themselves as such. They're done in secret, because you don't want your neighbour to know that you've hired a magician to blight their crops so you'll just get a better price at market or whatever. Anyway, but we'll stick with this formulation just for brevity, but so we can refine this as follows. 1, the magician could create an illusion and transform the appearance of things. We could be dealing with the appearances, and this transformation could take place in a context whether the audience knows that magic is taking place or one in which they do not. So you might know that you're at a party where there's a conjurer coming in, or you might not. And the potential benefits and dangers will partly depend, I think, on the audience awareness of how much they know what's going on. Even more critical, I think, is whether the changed appearance is closer to or further from underlying reality if such a thing exists. And of course it does exist for Plato. So we're not just about, do you know that a transformation is taking place? Are you aware that magic is taking place? The question is this changed appearance getting you closer to or further from what the thing really is? Because Plato, if everybody, if any philosopher ever lived, he thinks that there is a real thing in there. 2, the transformation could transform things in themselves. Again, the potential benefits and harms will depend partly on audience awareness, and even more on whether the transformations reveal, foster and restore, or conceal and disfigure the true healthy nature of the being, or the true nature of the object. And there's a third possibility, that 2 could follow from 1, and things could be changed in themselves as a result of a process which begins with viewing them differently, or being viewed differently. Magic could transform both the viewer and the viewed. And again, we'll see how this might cash out in the symposium in a moment. Again, the potential benefits and dangers will depend on whether the altered vision or the altered visioning and resulting transformation of the viewer or viewed is closer to or further from the true and healthy state of the person or the true state of the object. Because the initial appearance of something might actually be a long way away in Plato's eyes from its true nature. It could be, as he puts it at the end of the Republic, covered with barnacles. And the magician could be stripping away those barnacles and actually revealing the sort of inner nature of the object as Plato would see it. And here's a question just to sort of throw out. I talk about it at much more length in the scholarly paper. Can magic also transform itself conceivably out of existence? Because we saw that things are magical if the person viewing them does not understand how the transformation is affected in any way at all. But as a rational understanding grows about what the transformation is, what it involves, how it's come about, then the viewer is going to stop seeing this as a magical process. So the greater the depth of rational understanding of what's going on, the more that's going to preclude the ascription of magical to the events. So magic could be a transitional stage. It could be working towards a state of full rational understanding of the cosmos and how everything is linked together into this harmonious whole, whereby you don't need magic anymore. You've got full rational understanding. But as we'll see, given that we've linked magic to Eros, the daimon Eros, and to Socrates, does this mean that erotic love is going to work towards its own annihilation? Does it mean that philosophy is also working towards its own annihilation? As I said, I write about this more elsewhere, but I think it does. I think we're dealing with transitional stages. So we're getting to the closing furlongs. We're going to pull it together. So I'm claiming that Diotima is right to call Eros a magician, because in the Symposium we can see Eros affecting all these kinds of transformations in the ladder of love, the famous ladder of love in 2:10 to 12. If you remember, first of all, we fall in love with one beautiful body, then we see that the beauty in one body is linked to the beauty in all bodies. We need to love all bodies, and then all souls, and then all good practices and laws, and then all beautiful practices and laws, then beautiful forms of knowledge, and finally we have a vision of the form of beauty itself. It's being in love in 2:10 to 12. It's being in love with one beautiful body that gets the whole thing going. And Plato's often criticised for being, not least by Nietzsche, for being a very ascetic and love and sex and life denying philosophy. But we need to remember the ladder of love starts with falling in love with one beautiful body and sexual desire getting going. It's being in love which first sparks the illumination in our understanding, and this illumination in turn triggers the widening of Eros away from the physical to the spiritual, which then brings about a further deepening of our understanding, and so on and on in turn towards ever more abstract, beautiful objects, until finally the form of beauty itself. And as the whole is increasingly revealed to us, as we can see that all these beauties are connected into one beautiful cosmic whole, we can move towards the whole, towards the divine. So that's why we need the ladder. Before we get the ladder, we're stuck in the mortal realm, and the divine form of beauty is all up there. How do you get there? You need a ladder. What's the ladder going to go through? It's going to go through this daimonic realm. How? How does that happen? And it's the first thing that needs to happen is erotic desire of one body. This expanded erotic vision will crucially, so as you're going to increasingly expand your vision of the cosmos, so your vision of the cosmos is going to be transformed by erotic love. So that's the first transformation that erotic love affects of your vision of the cosmos, and you can see how it all connects together. But that expanded erotic vision is also going to transform you too, the lover, making you a better person, a better teacher, and increasingly able to bring forth the fine words that are going to transform the beautiful youths with whom you were originally in love. And all these transformations in the ladder of love, they reveal, rather than concealing and disfiguring, the true nature of the lover, the true nature of the beloved. I say possibly former beloved because it's not clear whether you still see them as an object of desire as you climb up the ladder towards the form of beauty. You may just see them as a pupil or a friend or whatever. And they reveal rather than concealing the true nature of the cosmos itself. So this is magic not as disfiguring, not as deceptive, all the things that Plato was bothered about in those early passages we looked at. This is magic as revealing truth, not concealing or disfiguring truth. The magician can turn dormant connections in the universe that are not normally visible or audible to us, into active humming connections which are available for humans to see, to hear, to use, to increase their virtue and thereby their eudaimonia, their flourishing. Eros in particular allows us to see how what we previously perceived to be separate, people, objects, practices, bodies of knowledge, are in fact connected by all being beautiful, and all being beautiful in the same way through sharing in the form of beauty. They're all parts of a greater whole. By revealing the whole, Eros, erotic love, strengthens that whole. So it doesn't just reveal the whole, it strengthens it because you understand it and you can use it. And the act of loving the parts of the whole strengthens the ties still further. And this astonishing process of revelation and transformation may well initially strike us as magical. However, as we've seen, as we come to understand it better, and understand ourselves and our beloveds or our former beloveds better and the cosmos better, the magic is likely to fade. This magical stage, as we've seen, is a transitional one. It's the in-between stage. You don't need it when you're at the divine level. So it shouldn't surprise us if Eros is transitional too, that it works towards a state in which the conditions for its existence no longer obtain. So we've got magic and Eros, erotic love, and as we'll see, also philosophy being transitional, because the same, I think, is also true of philosophy itself, defined as it is by Diotima as a desire for and search for wisdom. Because if you're defining something as a desire and a search and a pursuit, then what happens if that desire is satisfied, the search and the pursuit are completed. You don't need to love philosophy anymore. You've got where you want to be. You are wise. We're told the gods aren't philosophers and the gods aren't lovers. They've got what they need. And Socrates, as the philosopher par excellence, partial embodiment of Eros and magical practitioner with words, he may be heading in the same direction. Socrates, the erotic magus, cannot survive in his current state. Yet we shall see that the daimon magician, Eros, may be able to bring him back to life in another form. And I said by 6, we've got, I think, 6 minutes to go, so hopefully we'll make it. However, if the ultimate destruction of both Eros and philosophy, if their goals are reached, that seems a bit disturbing to us. If we think, well, I don't want to live in a world without philosophy or erotic love or magic. I don't want that. I don't want to be a divine God who doesn't need all this stuff. If that seems a disturbing outcome, well, I think we can cheer up, because I think we need to consider how likely it is that these goals ever will in fact be reached. As we're also told that erotic love desires eudaimonia, flourishing, to continue into the future. So the goal of Eros is always going to recede, at least in the world of human life and time. It's always going to be just out of reach in the ungraspable future. And the same may be true of philosophy. In our mortal timed existences, I claim, our erotic and philosophic quests go on. And they can, at least in their earlier stages, appear magical to the lover and the philosopher in their ability to transform not only our vision of the world, but also ourselves and others, because we are going to become better people as we ascend the ladder of love. And as we become better people, we become better teachers, and we transform our beloveds as well as ourselves. So there are these 3 different kinds of transformation going on, of our vision of the cosmos, of ourselves, and as we are transformed, so we are able to transform our beloveds. And just to remind you again that Plato, in Plato, this later distinction we get, certainly by Augustine, between natural magic and, well, no, earlier probably by Iamblichus. The later distinction between natural magic and demonic magic does not exist. In the Symposium, the daimones such as Eros can help us understand, access, strengthen and utilize the connected constituents of the cosmos through a deeper understanding of their inherent properties. These daimons can help us understand and take part in the whole. And the conclusion, we can now see how in Symposium 202, Plato confronts in the boldest possible way both the charge brought against Socrates at his trial, that he did not believe in the city's gods, but knew daimonic beings, and also the inchoate public perception of him, deliberately, I think, stoked by Aristophanes and perhaps unwittingly by associates such as Meno and Alcibiades and others, that Socrates was some kind of magician. Plato implies in 202-3 that Socrates, as the partial embodiment of Eros and the supreme philosopher, is indeed a magician. He says, yeah, that's fine, yeah, he is a magician. But there are ways of being this which are positive, not negative. And not only does he possess his own personal daimonic sign, which is another thing that worried the Athenians at his trial, but not only is he daimonios, daimon-like, but he may actually be a daimon himself. He may be Eros. Not just like a daimon, but actually a daimon. But that's good too. So Plato's being really bold here. Just say, okay, bring it on. Bring it on, bring on the charges. It's all fine, you've just misunderstood. And we may, and this is a sort of very experimental thought I'm ending with, we might be able to go even further by exploring the probable initial meaning of the Goyas, the magician, as somebody skilled in invoking the spirits of the dead. In this, that's what you get in Burkert and in Collins and so on. In this light, Diotima's depiction of Eros as a Goes and a philosopher may imply that Socrates' demonic, erotic nature means he has the power to revive himself. Just after this passage at 203d, we learn that on the same day, Eros may be dying and then come to life again. famous passage, Plato also being quite rude in it, I'm happy to say, but it has, as well as the rude side, it has a serious side as well. Does Socrates also possess such abilities? And if so, how might they be manifest? And I want to conclude by suggesting that it's by his continuing power to engage our minds and imaginations, by inspiring us to engage passionately, erotically in philosophy, and enter into a passionate debate with him and others in the Symposium. By doing all this, Plato Socrates turns us too into magicians, at least temporarily, and enables us to invoke his spirit and keep him alive. Thank you.